Okay, well, I'm going to get started because we have a very full program for you all today. So hello and welcome to the 14th Annual Latin American Colloquium, addressing solidarity and partnerships for recovery. My name is Jessica Gallagher and I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Global Engagement and Entrepreneurship at the University of Queensland and will be the MC for today's webinar. Even though we are all zooming in from different locations, I would like to commence by acknowledging the traditional owners and their custodianships of the lands where UQ stands. We pay respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognise the important role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play within our community and their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. I'd like to warmly welcome our guests, ambassadors, charge d'affaires and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Deborah Terry AO, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Queensland, and members of the University Senior Management Group, keynote speakers and panellists, representatives from government and industry, colleagues one and all. Thank you so much for joining us today. It brings me great pleasure to welcome back so many faces to this long-standing event. It's also wonderful that to welcome a number of new connections who are joining this colloquium for the first time today. Whilst it's a shame that we can't yet meet physically as we would normally do, I appreciate the enthusiasm for continuing the colloquium online. Collaboration and participation at the heart of UQ's relationships with the diverse countries of Latin America, and making events such as this possible has been extremely important to us, even with some of the barriers that we faced with COVID. I encourage you to engage with today's speakers as much as possible. The Q&A system is active today, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. This webinar is also being recorded and uploaded in the coming days to our Global Engagement YouTube channel, and we'll make sure that we send you all the links post the event today. We have a very full schedule, as I said, so I'd now like to introduce our President and Vice Chancellor, Professor Deborah Terry AO, to officially open the 2021 UQ Latin American Colloquium. Welcome, Professor Terry.
Thank you very much, Jess. And I'd also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we are meeting today. We honour their elders and their continuing cultural and spiritual connection to these lands as we walk together on the path to reconciliation. I'd also like to acknowledge the many ambassadors, charge d'affaires and consular officials who have joined us today. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your active participation in this really important event. And I'd also like to thank our long-standing partners at the Australian Latin American Business Council, who have supported this colloquium consistently over the past 14 years. We really welcome this opportunity to strengthen our relationships with Latin American nations, especially as we emerge from the pandemic and prepare for the recovery period that we all hope lies ahead. From our perspective, the theme of this year's colloquium, solidarity and partnerships for recovery, is both timely and apt. I'm proud to say that UQ has been developing a very broad range of partnerships throughout Latin America since the 1980s. Today, we have representatives of our university on the ground in both Santiago and Bogota, and these representatives are working to deepen our links with students, universities, governments, and industry partners across Latin America. And they're also an important point of contact for the more than 2,000 UQ alumni who are currently living and working in the region. Importantly, as we all know, the exchange of ideas and talent flows in both directions across the Pacific Ocean. More than 70 of the academics who we have been working on with here at the UQ were born in Latin America. So more than 70 of our academics who are on staff here at UQ were born in Latin America. And over the past 5 years, it's been our privilege to educate around 1,500 students from Latin American nations. That figure includes more than 500 postgraduate coursework students and another 250 students who are undertaking a higher degree by research. These students exemplify the goodwill and the intellectual exchange that exists between Australia and the nations of Latin America. And in many cases, they're working on projects that seek to solve some of the greatest challenges of our times. We also currently have 45 active research and academic agreements with governments, universities, and industry partners throughout Latin America. Many of these agreements involve educational or research programs in areas where we have either a shared mutual interest or complementary expertise. These agreements involve collaborations in health, tropical and infectious diseases, veterinary science, agriculture, environmental sciences, mining, biotechnology, urban planning, psychology, and entrepreneurship and innovation. As a result of this deep collaboration, UQ-based academics have co-published around 1,500 papers with Latin American academics over the past 5 years. Importantly, we've managed to maintain that collaboration throughout the pandemic, even as border closures have made it impossible, unfortunately, for us to meet in person. Here at UQ, we've participated in a range of online programs with our Latin American partners over the past year, including innovation and entrepreneurship seminars with the Peruvian University of Applied Sciences, a land access and resettlement masterclass with the staff of a major mining company, partnering with Sao Paulo State University on a global research alliance dedicated to sustainable agriculture and forestry. And that's just a handful of recent examples. But I've been consistently amazed by the wide array of collaboration that has continued across the Pacific Ocean in areas that are so vital to our shared future. Undoubtedly, as we all know, the pandemic has disrupted the business and education sectors in ways that we couldn't have foreseen 2 years ago. But as with every major disruptive event throughout the course of history, humanity has responded with a combination of resilience and innovation. So despite this terrible shock, we should all feel confident that new opportunities lie ahead. At UQ, for instance, with the widespread global adoption of digital learning, our approach to teaching will never be the same. Similarly, our approach to collaborative research has changed permanently, and suddenly the opportunities for international collaboration seem less constrained by either distance or geography. So it's wonderful to have an opportunity like this where we can start exploring the opportunities that lie ahead of us. Certainly, the sharing of new knowledge and insights in forums like this will be more important than ever as we enter this period of pandemic recovery. We have a terrific range of experts who are contributing their perspectives to the discussion today from across academia, business, government, and the diplomatic corps. So it should be a very thought-provoking and insightful session. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. And I'd now like to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Miguel Julian Palomino de la Gala, the Ambassador of Peru in Australia, to deliver the ambassadorial welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Professor Deborah Terry. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to express my special gratitude to the University of Queensland for carrying out the annual Latin American Colloquium 2021 virtually for approaching two topics. During and post-COVID-19, how education and work will look like, and the new ways of doing business. The pandemic of COVID-19 originated on 2020 has changed our ways and costumes, as well as the development of our societies and industries. But at the same time, it has become a reason for speeding up changes that have already been going on, such as digital transformation and the accelerated automatization of industry. Both of these as part of the phenomenon known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution that has been developing for the last decade. The Fourth Industrial Revolution has been preceded by three industrial revolutions. The first one in 1784 with the use of steam on mechanical production. The second one in 1817 came along with the mass production thanks to the use of electricity as a power source for machines. And the third one on 1969 with the surge of internet. Nowadays, some countries are still living the third revolution, whereas others with more technological capabilities are aiming to develop processes free of human intervention. With the beginning of the pandemic on 2020, schools and superior education centers shut down worldwide, and universities adopted measures to carry on with remote education. We must follow closely the evolution of education and the future of work. The World Economic Forum have warned that around 65% of students that started their elementary school on the year 2016 will enter the job market with jobs that did not exist at that time. The pandemic converged with the fourth industrial revolution changes, both of them coinciding in the same historical time space, last decade, and the present one. Technological transformation speed up due to COVID-19 has impact on business way and job dynamics as well. Remote work has become a feature of any workplace and workers have adopted to it. But the automatization and robotization of the fourth industrial revolution are destined to reduce the number of workers required to some specific task, resulting in the rising of unemployment numbers. This represents an enormous challenge for governments, companies, universities, and workers to adapt to these new scenarios. Another subject that has been going through changes is the business sector, particularly because of the progress of digital economy. Latin America is interested to join of the global tendencies on digital economies, focusing on the creation of opportunities for small and medium enterprises. To this scenario, COVID-19 has added new challenge to overcome that will modify our ways of working and approaching new areas of knowledge. I have been working for 6 years in Australia, and we, the Latin American embassies, has met during the last 15 years with the University of Queensland in order to identify priorities on our relationship with Australia, which is more trade and more investment, and of course, more cooperation in education. And because of that, I would like to finish by putting this topic, cooperation in education, on the table. Virtual Colombo Plan for Latin America. The new Colombo Plan is focused on supporting Australian students on getting internship in the Asia-Pacific region and doing the same for students of this region for getting internship on Australia. Now, 10,000 Australian students a year can get those internships. In April 2016, the diplomatic corps visited Tasmania with the former Australian Foreign Affairs Minister Julie Bishop, who presented the new Colombo Plan at the Australian Maritime College, on which occasion, in front of my Latin American colleagues at that time, I expressed to her the need for the Colombo Plan to be extended to Latin America. As we all know, Latin American students see Australia as an education destination and Queensland University on top because of the prestige earned. Now, according to the actual context, it is time to adapt to the new normal and to start thinking on a virtual plan for Latin America, mainly, but not only, focus on the very important number of Latin American students on Australian universities that had to come back home because of the pandemic. On the other hand, Australian students can get internship on the best ranked universities on 33 Latin American countries from north to south. Then let's propose a pilot virtual plan from Latin America that can be developed and led by the Queensland University. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency and Professor Terry. I'd like to invite Dr. Roberto Garcia, a senior lecturer at the School of Languages and Cultures at UQ, to moderate the first panel session, Reshaping the Way That We Work and Learn. Welcome, Dr. Esposo.
Thank you, Jessica. I hope everyone can hear me. ¿Todos me escuchan? Welcome, bienvenidos a todos. Welcome, everybody. It's a great honor and privilege to be able to moderate this particular panel. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank very especially to Jessica, who has devoted many years to keeping this space open in this dialogue between Australia and Latin America. UQ has headed this dialogue in the last decade at least. And despite all the difficulties and challenges, we've kept that dialogue going, and we've sort of I think we have spearheaded and continue to spearhead that dialogue. And our program in Spanish and Latin American Studies at UQ has always taken part in this venture, and so I think it's important that we continue that toward the future, despite all the challenges that we're facing with pandemics, for example. So today's session is to discuss how this, what we call in Spanish, this bicho, this bug, has affected the way we work, we learn, we interact with others. In fact, we maintain friendships, we maintain professional relationships with people, even within this country and overseas. And fortunately, this technology has given us the opportunity to do that. But I think we also have to bear in mind that in Latin America, what the pandemic has actually done is to highlight the digital divide that has really highlighted and put a spotlight in the divisions, particularly in the access to this technology. So this is the challenge for us in our work with this part of the world. And in terms of the theme of solidarity and partnerships, I think Australia could play, and this institution could play a very important role. And of course, the business community play an important role in breaching that divide over time. Having given that brief preamble, I'd like to introduce, I'll just briefly say that His Excellency, Mr. Armando Vargas Araya, Ambassador of Costa Rica, unfortunately won't be able to come due to unforeseen circumstances. And that we will go to to the introduction. So Nigel Warren is first off the rank in this discussion. He is the Victorian Commissioner to the Americas and board member of the Council on Latin American Relations. So I invite you to share your thoughts about what has changed in the way that you work, in the way that we relate to Latin America in the current situation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto, and thank you also to the University of Queensland. I'll make most of my comments on the commercial aspects, but I think the points you raise on the social aspects are really critical. And you know, I've been fortunate to live in the region and live in Chile for a number of years, and about to move to San Francisco, but work with our team throughout the region. A couple of things I'll comment on. We have really seen this focus on working with companies that are already there to really retain their position and retain their market share. At the same time, looking for and finding some new areas of growth, particularly around technology in some areas focused mainly in education and also financial services. But to address your question on change, look, some of the big things we've seen culturally is the agility of business has just changed significantly in a very short amount of time. So, you know, obviously, rather than being in physical workspaces, we've got far more rapid, consistent, regular, ongoing contact, both inside our organization and also externally with customers and partners than we've ever had. So in some strange way, we feel even more connected. It's not a replacement for face-to-face, but I think as we transition back out, we'll keep with us or hold on some of these ways of working and blend them with traditional ways of working. The virtual events and platforms have just been, for us, probably far more effective than we ever really would imagine. Latin America, for us, like a lot of states, has got a really important student recruitment market, and that's been obviously really disrupted. So we've tried some really innovative ways to stay connected with those students right across the main markets, and we'll have to keep doing that. It's going to require really considerable investment and some new strategies. Looking forward, we've seen some really new, interesting areas of collaboration at the research level and in some new areas that didn't exist before. And I think this environment of rapid brainstorming, connection, consistency sort of brought them out. So some really interesting areas, particularly in new energy, hydrogen specifically, and then also in some really exciting areas that apply to traditional industries with new technologies. One area is Earth observation. What I would say, though, that we've noticed, Roberto, is that industry's got to be working with us, with government at the same time. If you're working just with government, it's going to be a lot harder. On the trade side, and I'll finish up and give you two examples of things that have worked well. I think fortunately, because, you know, we've still got high copper prices, the mining industry in terms of the client base and the partner base has stayed pretty consistent. And at the same time, the agriculture sector in many parts of Latin America, as was mentioned by the ambassadors, modernizing. So that technological adoption has sort of seen us through in some of those industries. But what I would say is the mobility issue is huge. The border closures are huge. Just here last week, we announced, like New South Wales, the opening up of students coming back. And I spoke to my office in Santiago this morning, and they said the agent interest in the region has just spiked in 2 or 3 days because they want to really know what's going on with a lot of pace so they can start to plan to get students to come back into next year. I'll finish up and just say that something that worked really well for us in the last few months is we've run 2 virtual trade missions amongst 6 actually, but one was in education technology. And we felt those are really effective for getting really in-depth mentoring sessions on the market, having companies actually pitch to clients about their offerings, found roundtables to be really interactive. And it kind of set the path up for companies that when we can get back into the market, they've got that relationship already built. So in some ways, the digital environments helped to kind of speed up what that first trip to the market might be like, you know, hopefully in 2022. So I'll stop there. Hopefully it gives you a bit of a broad picture, but also some specifics of things that have been working well that we've seen over the last few months.
Thank you, Nigel. In fact, I've also found that, at least in my academic work and links with colleagues in Brazil and Argentina, in fact, I've been able to participate in conferences and seminars that I would not be able to do because, when I'm teaching, I can't just, drop everything and go to Buenos Aires or Santiago. So this format has actually created that ability to share research and ideas. Of course, what's missing in all of that is that social component that's so important, particularly in the Latin culture, that, and that's sometimes where the interesting ideas often come around the formal arena, let's say.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nigel. Associate Professor Ramya Yoko from UQ is the Management Discipline Leader of School of Business. Can I invite you to share your thoughts and ideas about reshaping the way we work and learn and teach, right?
Thank you very much.
Kind of situation.
Good afternoon, everyone from Brisbane. My area of research is particularly around the physical environment of work and especially open plan offices. So I'm just going to talk broadly around the research that I do in that area, and then later on we can talk about how that would help with reshaping how we learn and how we work as we move forward. So we are all very familiar with the fact that COVID actually shifted the way we work, the way we teach, the way we learn, where we work, what we do at work. So we're all very familiar with it. So I won't go into all of that, but definitely at the corporate level, the pandemic has given us this opportunity to work in a hybrid mode, in a flexible mode. So you can work from home, from the beach, from the cafe, from the truck, if you are a truck driver or something. So the COVID brought that back to us. We've always had that, but the COVID just made it a reality. So now the genie is out of the bottle and people are very familiar with now working from home. The biggest challenge then is how do we bring people back to the office? Is it the death of the offices that we already have? What are we going to do with all the planning or the buildings that we've had? So that's a major challenge for us. And we are now looking at what do we do around that flexibility. Technology seems to play a very important factor in enabling that flexibility. So it's important to have a quality technological platform. This is what we are now beginning to realize. And also the issue for productivity and well-being. So someone mentioned the fact that, yes, the social connection is not always there. And so the real issue is people are used to working with team members in the offices, and now they are working away from the office. So there's always this lack of inclusion, lack of connectedness, and people are craving for that. Similarly, in the education arena, the pandemic meant that we needed to shift how we deliver our courses. For example, we now have flexible delivery modes of our courses. We sometimes do some mixing and matching. We have lectures online and then tutorials in small groups, just to give the students that experience of connectedness. And therefore, it's important that we begin to rethink how we shape the campus of the future, or how we shape the corporate buildings of the future. So I'm just gonna give you one or two quick examples of what we have done in this area. We did a qualitative study, just wondering what people feel about these. And just like you would imagine, a lot of people threw in trust as a biggest issue. Employers are not trusting their employees, so they set up surveillances. We realized that a lot of people are talking about poor life balance, work-life balance, and they didn't have the opportunity to get education, give education to their students, to their children, and at the same time work. There is issue around Zoom fatigue and technological problems. Productivity was a little bit of a mixed bag. Some people said that they were more productive at home. Some people really want to get to work to gain that productivity. There are mental health issues, again, because of lack of connectedness. But people who have pets were able to hug their pets and relieve the problems that they have with mental health issues. But the major challenge we also realized from the study was the young professionals who have just joined, like internship, wanting to learn, gain experience from work. It's hard to do that online when there is no face-to-face interaction. So that's another big problem that organizations are battling with. And what I wanted to suggest is that some of these issues that organizations are battling with, there's possibly an opportunity for higher education to learn from what they are coming with, the kind of solutions that they're coming out with. Maybe we can learn a lot from that. Maybe what we need is a sticky campus that is able to provide all different kinds of activities, or maybe something that I can call an agile campus. Agile campus means that you have focused area for people to do their work individually. You have community spaces where students can gather with their lecturers and learn. You have cafes, you have restaurants, you have all of those things that can bring people back. And lastly, I just want, and I'll finish up in a moment. I just wanted to talk about the UQ initiative that we have, how UQ is actually responding to the pandemic. We have what we refer to as the Next Generation of Workspaces initiative through UQ Global Institute. I'm one of the co-leaders of this particular initiative. And the aim is to develop solutions and capabilities that enable and protect works and organization in a rapidly changing physical and work virtual environment. It has 20 academics and 20 organizations that we are working together to co-create and co-design solutions that can minimize the challenges post-pandemic. We talk about issues like, how do we engage collaboration? How does learning take place digitally? What about emotional issues, physical well-being and safety, leadership issues? The way we do leadership may have changed a little bit because of the pandemic. What kind of experience we bring employees back and students back to the campuses? And what can higher education learn from the corporate world in terms of agility of spaces? We are doing this at the moment. And we do necessarily want collaboration with other parts of the world in this area. So anyone who is interested in this, I will really appreciate it if we can get in touch and we can talk more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Remy, for some interesting and insightful ideas. Certainly this mode of working hybridly or in distant is often works better for people who are self-contained and don't need so much socialization. However, my experience recently with having to do home quarantine because my daughter's school had to go through quarantine and we couldn't get out of the house made it a little bit difficult because we couldn't go out for a walk. So these things, again, it depends on the person, and I think we have to see how best we can deal with that, or maintaining regular contact with colleagues or the institution or we work with or the business, just to see how you're going and how we are traveling, because isolation, people living on their own or having young children can be quite difficult in these circumstances. So it poses, I think, many opportunities, but also very many challenges as well. And I think particularly for those postgraduate students who are beginning their career, and like remember 2019, where you could actually go to a seminar, a conference, and give your paper and then talk to people outside the formal structure. So Marta Jimenez, can I invite you to share your thoughts? Marta Jimenez is a master's student in the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences at UQ. Marta.
Yes. Hi, Roberto. How are you?
Hola.
¿Qué tal? Yeah, thank you very much, Roberto. Good afternoon, everyone in Australia, and good evening for the people who are watching us from Latin America. Thank you very much for this invitation and for letting me represent part of the Latin American community of students here at the University of Queensland. I will share my perspective as an international student regarding the topic in this panel. I arrived in Australia just before COVID-19 hit this country, and even though in the beginning it was challenging, I had to work hard to understand that all what was happening was a worldwide event. I experienced since my first semester how the education system was trying to adapt to this new reality. And to be honest, I felt some rejection in the beginning Imagine having all my classes in my first semester online. But then I started changing the way that I was living in this new reality. I decided to organize myself, and I noticed so many good aspects that also helped me focus not only on my master's courses, but also helped me go through this new context. In that sense, I developed more soft skill and gained more confidence. This helped me to participate in the Universitas 21st and PwC Innovation Challenge, where they were looking for ideas that governments, businesses, and education providers could undertake to help improve and maintain shared and sustainable prosperity after the impact that COVID-19 had in the whole world. My proposal, the Global Talented Generation, was one of the 7 runners-up. In my model, I identified that after COVID-19, we needed to include 4 main things in this new educational model, that they were digitalization, cognitive, social and emotional, and adaptability and resilience skills. I've seen that COVID-19 was like the enzyme that the systems need to accelerate most of the process. However, this acceleration showed us that there are some other aspects that needed to be attended. One of them was the access to internet and the lack of technologies. Now, most of the Latin American countries are trying to make these services accessible to every person in their countries. And I think that this is a really good opportunity for most companies that probably are, and also the educational sector in Australia, and the educational sector also in Latin America. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you, Marta. So our last speaker on the panel is Stephen Barclough, a UQ alumni, and he is Assistant Secretary for Eastern Europe and Latin America in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Stephen, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Roberto, and it's great to be back at UQ virtually, my old university. A big hola to my colleagues from the embassies, Latin American embassies based in Canberra, and also I'd like to thank ALABAC for their support for this and their fantastic work more broadly in supporting Australian Latin American relations. As Miguel said at the start, and a number of people have touched on, COVID has accelerated, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, trends that were already happening in the world. And that's certainly true in foreign affairs and trade. And I'd encourage you, if you're watching the news on foreign affairs and trade, to look at those things through the lens of how has COVID made this more acute or better. So with that frame, I'd just like to touch on 3 ways in which, in terms of Australia's relations with Latin America, COVID has in fact accelerated relations. There are ways, obviously, where it's slowed it down, but I won't focus on those. And the 3 ways are, the first one is that Australian companies and institutions, there's been a considerable acceleration in interest in Latin America in terms of renewables, particularly green hydrogen. Why is that? Why would companies that are normally interested in mining, it's particularly from mining companies, suddenly be turning themselves into hydrogen companies and wanting to work in Latin America? And the answer is that these are companies that are normally used to doing mega projects in Latin America. Mine is a mega project. That means they're used to working with Latin American partners, Latin American governments, understanding social license in Latin America, and they're confident then that they can engage in mega projects, which is such as the production of hydrogen in Latin America. This change, which has noticeably picked up, also means there's opportunities for universities to actively collaborate with business and government. I'm talking about Australian universities, and I really need to give a sing out here to the UQ's Sustainable Minerals Initiative, which has already got a number of very productive partnerships in the region, including with its Chilean counterpart, Corfu, in setting up a centre of excellence, and also in Colombia, in hurricane-devastated islands, doing some planning for that island to be re-established with renewable energy. Second area is critical minerals. and lithium. The changes in technology have brought into focus the importance of lithium, which is essential for batteries. Who are two of the world's greatest producers of lithium? Well, they're Australia and Chile. So this is a significant thing for Australia, it's a significant thing for Chile, it's a significant thing for the region. And it was noticeable, for example, in April, that two Australian lithium companies joined together. They've now become the 5th largest lithium company in the world. And their key areas of operation are Australia, Chile, Argentina, Canada, and Japan. So we're seeing that more important and more strategic minerals, Australia and Latin America partnering there as we as the industry and commercial side is looking at that. Third one is education, and I know people have talked a lot about online education and what that means, so I won't repeat that, including Martha, who's lived the experience. But certainly Australia is placing greater emphasis on diversification in terms of source markets, and is looking at that, and also different ways of delivery, which means, of course, more online education. I take note, Roberto, that there are, that does bring into focus the inequalities about access. But we see potential for growth there, and our sense from the region, when I spoke to Australia's ambassadors before preparing for this presentation, real opportunity for universities to develop more online courses, especially short courses with micro credentials. That's a growing area and something to look into. I might stop there.
Thank you, Stephen. So I think we might be at the point where we can have a bit of a Q&A, and of course, the question on everybody's lips, I suppose, is that since some Latin American countries are beginning to reach 60 to 70% full vaccination, or even 80% vaccination, is when are we going to be able to travel to Latin America and vice versa? And so that's the great question. I've heard through the grapevine that Qantas may not be able to fly to Latin America until 2024, but again, that is only through the grapevine. We might be enlightened in another few months or so, or maybe even in this forum, if that may not be the case, or may well be the case. Anyway, can we open this to any questions from the audience, or even from the panel, if there are any questions to maybe throw at each other about these issues that have been raised? Don't be shy now. Yes, Ambassador, and if you can unmute, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Ambassador Diane Lapi, Ambassador of Uruguay. And I would like to thank you for this opportunity. I really wanted to go to Queensland and to have the colloquium for the first time, in my case, there. But it's great to have this opportunity to have it at least virtually. And I wanted very quickly to raise the experience of Uruguay, because you know that after the pandemic started, in 2007, Uruguay started with the Plan Ceibal, that was 1 laptop per child. So in a way, the pandemic found us prepared to deal with this kind of experience. But it was a challenge anyway, because since the first case of coronavirus was confirmed in Uruguay, the in-person classes were canceled and the population was urged to quarantine voluntarily, and it was very much respected, even if it was not compulsory. So the Plan Ceibal had to quickly change to transition, because every child used to have a computer, every child has a computer, but it was not entirely education online, and has to go transition to fully virtual education. And it was a problem to try to adjust virtual education to prepare children and teachers to that. And I was finding very, very interesting numbers. Previously, about 10% of students pre-COVID, 10% of students had experience with online learning, and nearly half of students use at least one online tool from what was available. But when the pandemic started and we have to go to online learning, at the beginning, 75% of the students joined virtual classes. And in a couple of weeks, over 85% of students and teachers in public school from primary to secondary education use the virtual platform. This makes us change the whole software system using a system that already existed, the CREA, but it was used for specific activities, and then it has to turn it to be a full program of learning education, but also to make sure that connectivity was reaching every point of the country. Because we have big connectivity, but we didn't want kids to use their parents' data, the data their parents were paid to work, or in some cases, the only computer available at the home was the Ceibal, La Ceibalita, the small computer that the children have. So it also make our Ministry for Education and our education institutions to work with the institutions that provide connectivity to make sure that it was free of charge for those who need it. And of course, something that we are just starting to see, and it was mentioned in the panel, and it's something that concerns us a lot, is the impact in future that we are going to have in the future generations, the impact for the kids to have this great change in terms of education and the limits in the social links with their kids. I just wanted to share that because even when sometimes you have in a way a platform to help you, it creates a lot of challenges anyway to go from specific activities to full e-learning education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, certainly. I think this especially for the younger kids, certainly students, primary, secondary education, where socialization is so important, and it's just as important as learning your times tables. This method obviously is out of total necessity rather than a desire. But also, I think the other issue that we need to consider is that some disciplines lend themselves more to this mode of hybrid learning than perhaps in health, for example, where you really need hands-on, or in scientific research where you need access to a lab. And so I think certainly hybrid systems, it's obviously it's been a way to accelerate the need and to address a particular situation and juncture, the use of these hybrid education platforms. Anyway, any other comments or observations from the panelists or from anyone else in the audience? Can I encourage you to ask a question or make a commentary?
Yeah,
or any feedback?
Yeah,
Marta.
yes. There was a question from one of the attendees to this seminar. She was asking me about what were the advantages to be studying online the whole time, right? As I said, I arrived, and once I arrived, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, we went into a lockdown. So imagine traveling so far from Peru to study everything online. That was shocking. I was stressed. So I started watching what was happening to me, to us, to everybody that was registered at least for the first time at UQ as an advantage, because I didn't have to probably think about the way I have to dress to go to the uni, or even I would spend more time going to the uni and I don't know, get distracted. So I gain time, I even save money, I focus, and I was able to attend to any other workshops apart from the courses that I was taking as part of the master's. And that helped me to build other type of skills. So what I recognize that this situation helped us, most of us, was to build resilience. So probably that was one of the first words that most people heard at the beginning of the pandemic. So the idea was to build resilience. So that activities that we were doing every day was going to help us to manage this situation, this stressful situation, this situation that's forced us to change, because actually no one's probably want to be at home at the beginning. Everybody was aware or worried about their jobs, you know, and yeah, actually I could find more time for me and focus on what I was doing. And that helped me to build a lot of confidence too, even to be here today and to be participating. And yeah, there are several things that this situation helped me build. But at the same time, I know that in other situations, there were people that they had problems. And something that helped me in the beginning was that I took some counseling sessions with UQ. So trying to explain to a professional the way that I was feeling and how I can overcome this situation. And actually with some of the tips that they gave me at that time, they were so simple that actually you would have imagined just applying some techniques to concentrate better every day, for instance. Some of the other techniques was that I was worried about the safetyness of my family, that they were in Peru, not to focus that much on the bad news, but trying to talk with them every maybe 3 or 2 days just to see how were they, and also try to focus on me, on my mental health. So yeah, I think that for all of us, the COVID, the pandemic, helped us to grow in different ways. And also, if we had problems, we had to seek for some solutions. So actually, that also helped us to go outside our comfort zone. And yeah, that's what I want to share with you as part as a student perspective, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Stephen, we have a question here. What advantages does Latin America present to Australia in regard to implementing its hydrogen strategy or clean energy strategy?
I think the whole world, it's a good question. I mean, the whole world is starting to turn to hydrogen, and it's in everyone's interest that there is a global concerted push for it. The advantages of Latin America is that Australian companies, particularly mining companies, are comfortable working there. And obviously Latin American companies and countries are comfortable working with them. So what you're seeing then is, if you like, the mining model can be shifted then to hydrogen. And obviously the hydrogen that will be produced in Latin America will be either used by Latin American countries or exported mainly to the broader market of the Americas. But there'll be Australian investment, there'll be Australian know-how, there'll be it will be through a partnership model. So it's seeing that shift from mining, which has been, I mean, mining will stay very important in terms of Australian and Latin American relations, but we're seeing that not shift but expand into a new area because Australian companies are comfortable working there. And I think also because Latin American countries themselves are embracing it and seeing that this is in their interest to adopt this new energy. and to share in the opportunity and the wealth that this new energy can bring.
Thank you, Stephen. Rachel, how many minutes have we got left, or shall I start to wrap up?
Roberto, we've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. There was a question for Nigel, but unfortunately he's not here.
There's a couple of questions, Roberto, in the Q&A.
Yeah.
So did you want me to read those ones out?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yep. So I'll just start at the bottom. Education qualification revalidation. Well, that's a lot of vacations. Education qualification revalidation is currently very lacking between Mexico and Australia. Is there any work being done to extend mutual recognition of university qualifications as a way of rebuilding after COVID? I'm not sure who, whether one of the ambassadors or someone in the panel might be able to speak to that question.
Stephen maybe could say something.
Yeah, I should take it, but I will have to apologise and say I'll have to take it on notice because I don't have an immediate answer to you about where we might be with Mexico on mutual recognition of degrees. So I'll send something back through to UQ on that.
Sure. So I think we've got Nigel's got his hand raised.
Nigel's back. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So that question I saw in the chat about, what have been the outcomes, the results, I'll try just give a couple of minutes. I think we've got as much as we can out of the virtual environment in terms of maintaining and understanding each other. But I think we've got to build back the face-to-face to grow the new. So what have we got out of the last 18 months? And I was up until recently was on the executive at CSIRO, have office in Chile, now with the Victorian government, have an office in Santiago. We've maintained, I think, and gotten to know people a lot better and been far more consistently connected. And you have to remember, people that I work with in my teams, in many cases, were having a very much more difficult time than we were. So it's come in waves, it's come at different times. I remember when my office in Chile last year was into 19 weeks of lockdown before Melbourne went into lockdown. So we've all been experiencing this at different times in different ways. So I think the fabric or the way it's built, the relationship is quite different. It's a lot stronger. But I'm of the firm belief that we've gotten pretty much as most of we can out of the virtual environment. And it's critical in 2022 that we get back to the face-to-face in a safe way if we really want to grow more and do things of real strategic importance. I think we are resilient as individuals, but we have a limit. And in my 20 years of working in and out in Latin America, individual relationships, face-to-face, being in another person's environment, understanding the pressures they're under, getting to know their culture, understanding their families. These are all elements that have really built the fabric between Australia and Latin America. And you can't get that from digital. So I'm voting for 2022 to get back. And the first trip I make out of San Francisco will be down to Santiago and to other parts where we're doing to get reconnected to people. So I think that's going to be so critical for us in the next few months.
Thank you, Nigel. His Excellency Ambassador of Peru had his hand raised. Please.
Yes, between Peru and Australia, we don't have a treaty about mutual recognition of studies or diplomas, but that issue was included in the free trade agreement, and Peru accepted all the certificates and studies that people in Australia does, and they want to be looking for the recognition in Peru. We don't have problems with that.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
I have 2 questions posted to me, and I would just like to attend to them as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So the first question is, You spoke about the need for human connection. I was hoping you could expand on this and any tips for working better with colleagues virtually. So I have a couple of tips based on the findings from our research. We did ask people how they really want to connect with their colleagues moving forward. And a lot of people, majority of the people we interviewed would say that, yes, I would like to work from home like 1 to 2 days a week, but the remaining 3 days, I would like to come to work. So what a lot of supervisors are doing would be to make sure that team members actually overlap when they come to work, like at least 2 to 3 days a week when they come back to work. So the intentional overlap is to help that social connection. So that's very important. You can work one to 2 days at home, but these 3 other days, you need to be there for the rest of your team members, for mentoring to happen, for collaboration to happen, for learning and transfer of knowledge to happen. And then the other thing that people are talking about is outdoor events. So if you got your 2 jabs of the COVID vaccine, you can put on your mask if you have to, but then you have this opportunity to take fresh air. So you can design a lot of outdoor activities for people so they can be connected. And then in terms of offices, we are talking about agile offices that have specific spaces for specific kind of tasks or work that you are doing. So you can have a place where you can do your own private work and you can be there alone. You can come back to the open to interact with other people. So you have all of these other issues or things that you can do. And talking specifically about collaboration, collaboration has to be intentional. You can't put people together and expect them to collaborate. One of my PhD students who did a study of a building where you put all researchers and innovators together, they didn't collaborate because it was not intentional. So somebody has to manage them. Somebody has to put something there on the table for them, have to help them to engage each other. The serendipity talk around coolers, around water coolers and printers are very important, but somebody has to initiate it. So I would just stop with that. The last question says, do you think this is a benefit in having hybrid environments like the one currently adopted by universities, like online lectures and in-person tutorials, which could have huge environmental advantages if adopted globally? My simple answer is yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy. And before we go, I'm going to ask a bit of a prickly question to Stephen. This has to do following Nigel's comment about the person-to-person contacts and going to Latin America. Because as you know, many Latin American countries have been using many different types of vaccines, including the Chinese, the Russian, and several others. Is there any thought in DFAT about allowing students from Latin America who have received those vaccines to be able, eventually when borders are open, would they be allowed to come to study in Australia perhaps? Or is there any thought about that sort of a scenario?
Yeah, thanks, Roberto, for the question. I think there's 3 parts to this. The first one is the sort of health part, and you'll see the Prime Minister put out his plan, which is foreshadowing and opening up, but he's not going to sort of rush into detail, and he wants to move obviously with medical advice and sanitary conditions.
Yeah.
Also, the TGA is busily working on recognising vaccines, again in a manner that's based on evidence. Because as you say, obviously there's vaccines that are recognised in Australia, but there are other vaccines that have been used around the world. So they are working on that in a scientific manner. So I think for that kind of question of health-related opening up decisions, really I know no more than you, because these are decisions taken at the top based on health, and we're clearly moving towards opening up. And like Nigel, I've kind of mentally marked in that 2022 will be a year to get around, and I hope that's the case. The other thing to watch, of course, is commercial decisions by airliners, and they'll make their own decisions about how they shift to where I guess they feel they want to get customers or establish market share or retain market share. The third area, and this is more coming back to the audience here, is that people might have seen that New South Wales state government has already got a plan for opening up to students. South Australia has as well, and Victoria has just submitted a plan to the Commonwealth, I think last week, because the decisions about letting in the numbers of people, including trials for students to start coming back, rests heavily with the state governments, because they manage the quarantine, they manage the risk of health and the ability to receive them. So I think for that area, the productive discussion is for universities is to be having with your own state governments about, your desire to have students be able to come in and from which parts of the world and why, because that's the actual, if you like, the line of decision making.
Thank you, Stephen.
Stephen's right. We just very briefly, we put in a plan to do 120 weeks, so 500 a month to start with, but it's critical, and it's critical that we get students from Latin America coming back into Victoria. So it's a very high priority for us.
Right. Okay, so Jessica?
I think we're going to have to move on.
Yeah,
so.
move on. Okay, so I'll just basically wrap up. I think we're all looking at the second half of 2022 to go to Latin America, but we can't book anything yet. So thank you, everyone. I think the main themes are that obviously the mother of necessity is improvisation, or improvisation is the mother of necessity. So I think what we've been able to do in the education sector is adapt to the situation. In many ways, we have been very privileged because we can, like I am doing now, I'm in my study at home, and we've been able to, find a place to work and study and read and write and teach our students. But many people have not been able to do that, especially in Latin America, in terms of if they're working in manufacturing, if they're working in services, if they are people that work on the streets. And that has been very difficult. And also for many of us, of family members here in Australia and in other parts of the world. Certainly, I think this format for education and communication will remain as the technology is developed over time. I'm not quite sure whether we'll be able to have coffee through this, but anyway, that's going to be the challenge for the developers. But I think it made the opportunity to continue what we do, what we love to do, and to maintain those contacts across the Pacific and around the world, and sometimes even in very intense ways. And I think it has been a way that we can at least nurture through distance or virtually those contacts, and hopefully in 12 months, we'll be able to actually go there physically and shake hands and hug those people that we work with and that we have strong relationships with. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Roberto, and thank you to all of the panelists and to those who posed questions. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Erin Watson-Lynn, who is the co-founder and chair of the Australia LATAM Emerging Leaders Dialogue, which was established in 2018 to strengthen relations between Australia and Latin America. She is an academic, consultant, an entrepreneur with over 12 years experience in higher education and international relations. Welcome, Erin, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me all okay. Excellent. So thank you very much, Jessica. I just would like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and where I'm zooming in from today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation down here in Melbourne, Victoria. So thank you for that kind introduction. And I do want to thank Vice-Chancellor Debbie Terry and yourself, Jessica, for inviting me to be here today in my capacity as chair of the Australia LATAM Emerging Leaders Dialogue. I want to acknowledge all of the diplomatic corps who are here as well, some of you who I know, some of you who I don't know, and I would love to connect with you later if we haven't met already. So what a ride it has been over the last 3 years to be here today, now leading an organisation with over 30 volunteers from 7 different countries between Australia and Latin America. We've got a whole range of different program areas, across very innovative program areas that, once upon a time included in-person dialogue. We have an online blog for the latest analysis on the region. We have a language and cultural exchange program and club, and an online video series that brings together established leaders from across the region. We aim high. We like to work with politicians, senior bureaucrats, international organisations and various embassies. And we've just started. But it didn't start like this, and that's a story that I'm going to tell you about today. So as many of you know, and maybe many of you don't, who, this is the first time we've been introduced to each other, I have worked in universities, think tanks for over a decade. And much of the work that I have done has focused on Asia in a really broad general definition. I've started my own international education company focusing on India, run programs across Southeast Asia, and I've completed a PhD on the Indian diaspora, just some examples of that. But somewhere along the line, I found myself embedded in these G20 circles. And fast forward all of that to 2018, I was heading to Argentina as an Australian delegate to the G20. But to be honest, and I know some of you know this story already, I was exhausted and my life was really chaotic. I was juggling at the time being a single parent. I had senior roles in universities and I suffered really significant burnout. Before I went to Argentina, I'd collapsed on a plane on my way back from Singapore. I was really, really tired. And when I went out to Argentina, I had just been in the US. I flew back to Australia for my daughter's birthday, somehow thinking this was possible, and then was about to get on this plane to Argentina again. And I remember really vividly this conversation actually with my father, and I was like, I don't want to go. I don't really know where Argentina is. I don't really know what language they speak. And I remember him saying to me, just go, get on the plane. I'll bet you come back speaking Spanish and you'll absolutely love it. And I think that my ignorance at the time was really symbolic of what we see in international relations practitioners and analysts. Well, my Spanish today, no habla español. I try occasionally, but it really was a perspective changing and in many ways life-changing trip, that first visit in 2018. So of course, I was fascinated by the beauty of Buenos Aires. But when I landed, I had a real shock and I struggled to get around without any Spanish at all. And I suffered that really horrific jet lag that you all have probably experienced in your travels between the 2 continents. But at the B20, which is part of the G20, the civil business engagement part of the multilateral forum, I ran into some people who had actually met in China a few years before, and reuniting with those people led me to finally meet some people who were from Argentina. And they really were the most wonderful, intelligent people who really challenged a lot of my thinking about Australia's role in engaging globally and in the Indo-Pacific and Asia-Pacific region, and of course, with Latin America more broadly. And I'll never forget this conversation with the person who ended up becoming my co-founder, Borja Marcel Seward, who said to me, you only look at your region and you never look any further out. And I remember it so clearly. And that was at about 1 a.m. at an asado, which was dinner, which again, cultural difference that I didn't really understand. But that was really the moment when the Australia-LATAM Emerging Leaders Dialogue was born. I flew from Argentina across to Chile and went to a series of meetings ahead of APEC. So the embassy there, I was in my role as AsiaLink, Director of Diplomacy at AsiaLink at the University of Melbourne, and former Ambassador Rob Ferguson put together a whole range of meetings, including with the APEC Secretariat, various universities. I did some presentations and just sat there listening to what people in Chile thought about Australia and our role in the region. And it was really the trade office, the International Economic Trade Office in Chile, who really pushed me on the, I guess, trade and investment relationship. And I'll never forget them saying, what about ANZFTA, the Australia-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, Australia-ASEAN-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement? And, you know, saying, was it something we can join, or how do we get our own ANZFTA? Obviously, Chile's love for free trade agreements coming through. But what was really interesting about that conversation was it wasn't necessarily about engaging with Australia as such. It was seeing Australia as this, I guess, bridge to Asia and bridge to this other region that they were really interested in engaging with. And it was really clear to me at that point that the, I guess, the bilateral and multilateral relationships really were where Australia-Asia relations were around 30 years ago. And I remember that conversation really with Rob as well at the time. So together, these trips really highlighted for us that there was a significant opportunity to play a space in this intersection between what were the geostrategic and the geoeconomic piece, along with facilitating some kind of platform for young people between Australia and Latin America. And this was about showing Australians that Latin America is an option, and to show Latin Americans that Australia is an option as well, in terms of a whole range of issues across those trade and economic pieces and so on that I've already mentioned. When I came back, I spent months speaking to people, many of you who are probably here today as well, and trying to get some traction. And, you know, for all of the reasons that, you know, the strategic interest, shared economic interest, and, you know, the old fashioned trade competitor piece would come up all the time, that's obvious. But also looking at what those shared challenges were in this period that we're going into or are going into, and now has rapidly been accelerated with greater competition than ever before, strategic competition. And these opportunities for us to collaborate around US and China relationship and help navigate that relationship, and Australia's diversification efforts, especially in trade. And, you know, I kept talking about resources, higher education, all these pieces we're talking about today. But it was a really challenging bit of work that I had to do there. And despite a lot of goodwill, and there were quite a few people who would put resources into this, and there were a few people who did put in-kind resources in and would help us along, but it was really hard to lock down any funding to get what we did off the ground. So I put in my own money, got on a plane, went back to Argentina, called the embassy, got as many access to as many people as we could, and went back. That trip, I actually met two people who came to join our steering committee, one who's now our CEO and really is the driver behind our organisation. I had met with Alexander Downer, just happened to be in Argentina as well. I talked to the ambassador about the prospect of an in-person dialogue that replicated some of the models that we see across Australia and Asia. And it was from that meeting that I went back and we had a date for our first dialogue. So Ambassador Brett Hackett, who, if you're here today, I can never thank you enough for being our first adopter or our early adopter and hosting that dialogue. But I won't go into what we did at that dialogue and what came out of it. We have a report online called Closer Than You Think, which you can go and have a look at. And of course, that led to us going, okay, well, what are we going to do next? We need to do another dialogue. Copper America's coming up, sports diplomacy. This is perfect. And that's when COVID happened and everything just kind of shut down. And in many ways, we were quite burned out from the work that we had already done over about a 1.5 year period. So today's theme for this conference is theme of solidarity and partnerships for recovery. And I think what we did next really exemplifies this, and then I'll go to some key lessons, and I'm very mindful of the time. So don't worry, Jessica, I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. But I think what we did really exemplifies that solidarity for partnerships and recovery. What inspired us to actually build our first program post-COVID was the repatriation flight between Buenos Aires and Melbourne. And in a strange twist of serendipity, we secured an interview with one of the pilots, Nick Thorne, one of the Qantas pilots, and Qantas agreed for us to have him come and be interviewed in this video series, which we now call our El Emergente video series. Since then, we've interviewed former presidential candidates, Congress people, really prolific professors and experts, and academics and leading entrepreneurs through that video series. So again, thanks to Qantas as an in-kind early adopter, we were really able to embrace that new way of working that COVID was presenting to us, and really kicked off the next year and, well, now a year and a half of what our organisation has become. So it has its challenges, no doubt, for many of the reasons we seek to work with a region like Asia, the reasons we don't work with Latin America, the time zone, you know, we're not in the zone, as we like to call it in Australia, between, you know, Southeast Asia and so on. But, you know, in other ways, we're not far away. And sometimes, you know, the transpolar flights have exemplified that, you know, and sometimes the language skills are tricky. And, you know, in Asia, you find English is really prolific, obviously, because of the history of colonization. It's different. And sometimes we find that Australia's transactional approach gets in the way of Latin America's more dialogue and conversational approach to doing things. But we have found ways to work around this. So I've got 3 key pieces that we have found has worked for us in terms of recovery and building partnerships that I'd like to share. So the first one has been embracing technology, and that's already been mentioned here today. But before, even as young people who love tech, and, well, I mean, I'm probably the oldest of the bunch, but, you know, we still only imagined building bilateral and multilateral relationships by being together in person. So we were constantly pitching for money to get people on planes. And we're no longer constrained by that. We're no longer constrained by distance. Sometimes we're constrained by time, and we have these small gaps where we can work, but distance isn't an issue. And young people do build relationships really well over technology. I agree with Nigel, we need to get face to face, but young people do that very, very well. And many of the people who work in our organisation I've never met. The second thing is that partnerships can connect regions. So what I mean by this is thinking trilaterally, or thinking about what that third piece or that other mechanism might be. So we're about to film our next El Emergente series with someone from the OECD. I won't reveal too much. And we're looking at other opportunities to collaborate, but that's because we have shared interests. So finding that third party or the third country or third organisation can really help as well. And we found that along the way throughout our journey. And harnessing, the third one is harnessing the energy and forward-leaning approaches that young people have. So looking at that next generation of people. Like I said, I'm probably the oldest, I'm 36, so I'm old in this group of people. I leave them to TikTok, but they are able to drive these contemporary approaches to doing business and doing things together and partner and growing programs together. You know, we've got a new brand that we're about to announce, which is the first time it's ever been up behind me. And none of that would happen without these innovative and tech-based approaches that young people take. So finally, today I've told you about this sort of unexpected emergence of our organisation, you know, over 3 years ago now, and where I see it, how it fits into this bigger global picture in terms of strategic competition, and why we should be partnering together, and how we've really collaborated and built this organisation throughout COVID-19. But I want to leave you with one thing, is that we have done all of this with no funding. So I really want to acknowledge all of those young people. I know some of our team are listening in today with who really are the reason that our organisation is what it is, and have done that in 3 short years. But it does require resources. So as you're thinking about how to build programs, conduct research, or look for innovative ways for recovery, or where to put your resources, either in kind or financial, look to us and look to organisations like us and how we can work together and sustain that next generation of Latin American and Australian leaders as we emerge from this pandemic and start to move around the world again. Thank you, Jessica. Sorry if I went over time, I probably did.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin. It was great to get to hear about your experiences. And we do have some time for a couple of quick questions. So if anyone wanted to ask Erin any questions, if you could raise your hand to our ambassadors online, or we'll also check the Q&A. Just sort of scrolling back across my Zoom screen.
Oh, I can see a question in the Q&A chat, which is, I'm wondering if you have Latin American people as part of our strategic team and how we can get involved. Yes, we do. Our team is across 7 different countries. We have Latin Americans in Australia, Latin Americans in Latin America, and we're always looking to grow our team. We have people who are really heavily involved. We have a governance committee. We have, I guess, a leadership committee, and then we also have contributors. And then we have people who are involved in all different parts of doing things. We have lots of WhatsApp groups that ping at all times of the night. So we really encourage diversity, inclusivity, and that's part of, I guess, the real values of the organisation. It's a platform for everyone, and we welcome ideas as well. So if people like yourself want to be involved, just contact us, and you are absolutely welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm sure that if anyone did have any other further thoughts for Erin, please don't hesitate to pop them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and we'll certainly make sure that she gets those and be able to come back to you as quickly as possible. But thank you so much, Erin, for the keynote. As I said, it was really fantastic to hear about your experiences, and it's very inspiring in terms of community building. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Frederick von Biel, who's a lecturer of strategy and entrepreneurship with the UQ Business School. Dr. von Biel is going to moderate the second panel discussion on building stronger business connections and partnerships during and post COVID-19. So welcome, Dr. von Biel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today as a moderator of the panel. COVID has been devastating for many individuals, families, businesses, and societies at large, as we all know. But at the same time, it has also created opportunities to take a step back, to reflect, and potentially to find new and better pathways forward. And in this panel, we will focus on these opportunities, on the new pathways forward. And we'll focus particularly on building stronger business connections and partnerships during and post COVID-19. And of course, we focus particularly on the connections and partnerships between Latin America and Australia. We have a brilliant set of panel members who I would like to briefly introduce now. We have His Excellence Mr. Ronald Resinas, who's the ambassador of Guatemala to Australia and New Zealand. We have Paula Lasso, who's a project lead for reliability improvement at the Lihir mine. And she's also the director of the Australia Latin America Business Council. Then we have Wu Tran, who's a co-founder of Go1, which is a startup, or in the meantime, probably a bigger company, which is focused on transformational learning through online courses. And he's also still practicing as a medical doctor at the same time. We have Gabrielle Hall, who's a senior investment advisor at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade. And at the moment, she is primarily responsible for attracting and facilitating direct investment from the Americas region into Australia. And last but not least, we have Christian Campo, who is the president of the Australian Latin American Young Professionals. And he's also the CEO of CF Consulting and Development. Now, I would like to invite the panel members to offer insights and case studies on building partnerships during and post-COVID between Latin America and the Australia region based on their own experiences. And of course, these experiences can focus on the public, private, or academic sectors. And I would like to directly hand over to His Excellence, Mr. Ronald Resinas.
Good afternoon to all. It's very exciting to be here on my first colloquium with the University of Queensland. I would have loved to be there personally, but given the circumstances, we have to make the best of what we have. To start off, we have to ask ourselves a question. What have these 2 years of pandemic left us? The answer is not very uplifting because these 2 years leave us with global tensions, a disrupted supply chain, increased freight rates, shortage of containers, and overall, a slower trading system. But what do we do now? Do we look for other directions, or do we try to do what we were doing before? I think the answer is quite obvious, and we have to look for new directions to find new solutions. I see in those new directions many possibilities of new business connections and partnerships between Australia and Latin America, but I will focus only on two. The first one, although Latin America has a huge mining potential, we have to stop seeing it as only that, because we do have many other great potentials that can be intensified in our relationship with Australia. Australia should start looking at Latin America as a perfect place for direct investment and nearshoring. Latin America has many advantages for that nearshoring. For example, our production costs are way lower. We have a huge labor force. We have pretty stable economies. We are growing almost 6% in this year, 2021, despite of COVID. The Latin American countries have trade agreements with each other and with the United States and Canada. We represent a market of almost 650 million people. We are geographically close to the biggest economy of the world and the 300 million people that represents. Most of us have laws that protect and provide incentives for all the investments. We have the infrastructure and we have the natural resources. By investing in nearshoring, Australia can benefit greatly and help us at the same time. Those investments will help us increase our exports, create more jobs, and help us fight the poverty that has been hurting us badly. The second opportunity I wish to discuss is in labor. The pandemic highlighted an existing problem in Australia, the lack of workers in many fields, especially the agricultural field. Billions of dollars have been lost because there was nobody to pick up the fruit. I talked to the Queensland farmers and they have the problem. I talked to the NFF and they said that the problem is nationwide. But on the other hand, the pandemic and all the climate change related natural disasters have left Latin America with thousands of jobs lost. There are thousands of families that do not have an income today. So if we add 2 and 2, the answer is very, very simple. Latin America has the experienced, skilled, and semi-skilled workers that can help form a year-to-year reliable workforce for Australia, while Australia has the jobs that our workers need. It's a win-win situation. Australian farmers could find a solution for their ongoing problem. Latin American economies would benefit because it would provide an income to all those families that don't have it today, creating a sustainable form of reducing poverty in all of our countries. Australia recently announced the creation of an agricultural visa. This could be the perfect bridge to find those partnerships that can benefit both sides. Australia has experience with seasonal workers because they have them with all the Pacific Islands. And Latin America has the experience with programs in which we send workers to the United States and Canada. For example, Guatemala has had a long-lasting arrangement of this kind with Canada. It proved to work before COVID, it has worked during COVID, and it will work post-COVID. It began in 2003 with only 215 workers. This year, 2021, during COVID, we sent over 10,000 workers to work in Canadian fields. And next year, post-COVID, we're expecting to send anywhere between 14,000 and 50,000 workers to work in Canada. I put that as an example just to emphasize the fact that we need to think out of the box. We need to rethink those partnerships. Latin America and Australia are like-minded, and we need to take advantage of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I very much like this forward-looking, positive view on things, and I think there's definitely something to it. Australia wants to also move away from mining or become more independent from mining, but is lacking the workforce, so I think you have made some really good points. Let's directly go to our next panel member, Paola Lasso, to hear what she has to say about partnerships between Latin America and Australia.
Thank you, Frederick. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Turrbal and Jagera peoples of the lands that I'm speaking to you from today. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living, learning, and working from today. I guess to the point on mining, it will be required for future development. So I guess it will remain one of the key economic sectors that both Australia and Latin America will continue to work closely together in the near future. And some might say that COVID-19 has been the best chief information officer that the world has ever seen. Digital transformations and technologically adapted solutions to do the same things that we were doing before managed to be rapidly deployed all across the world in record time. New technologies were also created in order to operate in this new environment of remote working, physical distance, and controlled movement of people. A silver lining was and continues to be delivered by COVID-19, unfortunately and luckily. Moving forward, companies understand that there is an effective remote way of doing business and that the perceived physical distance between Australia and Latin America can no longer be used as an excuse not to forge closer links between the two regions. For instance, Chile's INEAX closed the acquisition of Australia's Downer mining blasting services during the pandemic. Same with Brazil's JBS buyout of Australian pork business Rivalia Holdings. There are several examples of mining technology developed and deployed both in Australia and Latin America, facilitating the remote and safe operation of mining sites without business disruption. New local businesses have been developed to support the mining industry due to the COVID-19-led disruption of logistics chain internationally and domestically. The mining industry has shown a strong support for governments and local communities impacted by the pandemic. For instance, the company I work for, Newcrest Mining, supported together with other mining companies and the government the first intensive care unit being set up at the Yansatsa Hospital, and the only one in Zamora Chinchipe province in Ecuador. The ICU, yes, of course, addresses a short-term need, but is there for the long-term too. Another example is from the BHP Foundation, which addresses, as part of its country program, is delivering access to online education and solar energy projects across Chile. Several small community businesses were also accelerated and created in a digital way and with transformation, with the support of seed funding from mining companies. Again, I just want to reemphasize that the pandemic has been probably one of the hardest experiences that society has had to face in recent times. But it is important to remember that with every crisis, there are always limitless opportunities. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Paola. Really great examples. Very happy to hear that. I mean, the mining industry is one of the industry sectors that has been has come out of the pandemic relatively positively, I would say, and hasn't been as negatively affected as many other industry sectors. And so it's great to hear all these examples where the mining industry actually has done something good and not only benefited from not being negatively affected, but actually done something good for all the others who have been negatively affected. Thanks for sharing. I would now like to directly hand over to Wu Tran to hear his opinion and examples.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Vu. I'm one of the co-founders of Go1. If I can just give a brief introduction of myself, it just might help. So we're a Queensland-based company. I started this company with my best friends from high school. We all went on to do different things at university. But what Go1 is, the easiest way to think of us as the Spotify or Netflix for workplace education. We focus on B2B, so we train people in the workplace. We offer over 100,000 courses and learning items on almost everything you can think of, from compliance through professional development training, but we don't create a single piece. We bring it from people like Thomson Reuters for financial compliance training through to Harvard Business School for leadership development. And what we do is we bring it all into one place for our customers who are businesses of all sorts of sizes, including governments, to consume and train their staff. And so the conversations we're having today, I think, are incredibly relevant. For us as a company in Go1, we've grown from 4 people in a garage, it's a very typical story, to about 300 people globally across 10 offices. We don't actually have a presence in Latin America yet. And the key word there is yet for me. But we have probably spent the last 3 months really going very, very intensively into looking at how we approach emerging regions, including Latin America. At the moment, my job is to actually head up our growth in Southeast Asia, which is the next port of call for us. And we've been growing a team there over the last few months, and I'll be growing it over the next 12 months. But after that, my next role will be looking at Latin America, as well as Europe for the rest of our expansion as well. We recently crossed that threshold and were valued at over $1 billion as one of those companies. And for us, that was a really great achievement, not necessarily about the valuation, but to understand that companies like Microsoft and SoftBank who have invested in us really believe in that idea of what we're trying to do, which is focus on adult education, educating workers in the workforce. Because for most of us, we've learned on the job, not necessarily just in our degrees in education at universities or high schools, but actually in our role once we've entered the workforce. As Frederick mentioned, my background's actually as a doctor. I'm a GP, but my skills are highly transferable into other areas, such as what we do in technology and education. If I can just touch on COVID very briefly, the rate determining factor for Go1 and whether or not we become the company we should become over the next 5 to 10 to 20 years is actually going to be about talent. Your Excellency, you mentioned that, Latin America shouldn't just be known for digging things out of the ground, as Australia shouldn't either. And I fully agree with you, because talent is the rate determining factor of growth for a company like Go1. And I guarantee you, when you look at the companies with the largest market caps in the world, like the Facebooks, the Googles, or any other technology company, or actually any company in general, talent is going to be the key thing. And one of the things that we're looking at Latin America for at the moment is not just for customers, it's actually for talent. It's actually going, how do we not just create jobs in the region, but actually use those jobs to actually power our growth? Because it is an arms race right now for talent. Because engineers and developers can actually work anywhere in the world, as we've mentioned a few times on this call. It means that you can work from the Sunshine Coast here in Queensland and work for a company over in the Bay Area in San Francisco, or you can work from Sao Paulo and work for Go1. And so for us, one of the biggest opportunities we see with or at least the untapped opportunities, is actually around utilizing the talent, whether that talent is, nurtured here in Queensland or in Australia or in any other part of the world, actually using them to be able to actually grow the products that we provide. Because as a company, yes, we've reached over $1 billion in valuation, but we don't actually build anything physical. It's all software. And so as a result of that, we need people to be able to do that. If I can give you an example in a different region and just to show you the thirst for what we do, during COVID, during the start of the outbreak last year, I reached out to the Malaysian government as part of my role in building out Southeast Asia. And I said to them, we'll work with you to provide free training to your entire working population. Let's just see how it goes for a few months. And so we launched that with the Malaysian government's HR Development Fund. And we trained in the course of 3 months over 200,000 Malaysian people, to the point now where they wanted to deliver training to over 2 million people in the next 2 years, and their workforce of 10 million people over the next 5 years. And that's what we did, all online from right here in Logan in Queensland. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think when we talk about the digitization of skills, the opportunity there is not necessarily to provide all learning through online education. I'm a doctor. You wouldn't come and see me if I did my entire course online. But at the same time, there are certain skills that people want to learn. They want to learn it on their own time and on demand. And so when we look at COVID-19 and what's happened with lockdowns and the challenges with trade, I'm an optimist, and I look at it as going, it's accelerated a lot of what we would not have had available to us if this hadn't happened. So if I look at it from the optimistic point of view, that silver lining point of view, the advances we've made in technology and the adoption of technology, the fact that all of us are on this call today, yet can still go and cook dinner in a few hours' time, is quite phenomenal. There are downsides to it, but I do think there are some advantages to it as well that, we're going to take advantage of over the next 5 to 10 years. And I can almost guarantee you'll see some of the largest companies in the world who none of us are aware of today that will emerge over the next 5 to 10 years as a result of this acceleration we've seen. So, if I can kind of recap, we've definitely been the beneficiaries. And I don't want to put that lightly, but we've been the beneficiaries of the acceleration of change that we've all spoken about today as a company. But what that acceleration has resulted in is us actually looking more globally. We would not have looked at Latin America as a region for probably 5 years. We're now looking at it within the next 18 months. And for me, that's incredibly exciting, despite not being able to travel at all.
Thanks, Wu. Really great example, very interesting insights. And I think my key takeaway is that, or not the key takeaway, but one or two takeaways are that actually, thanks to Go1, you could easily onboard and upskill even workers in the Latin America's region, or any Australian company could do that, even if the borders are still closed and you couldn't fly them in for traditional workshops that you would have, and trainings that you would have traditionally had. So I think it just speaks to the point that His Excellency made earlier, that there should be more, more transfer and more collaboration in terms of skilled workforce, and there are less and less barriers to that. I would now like to hand over to our next speaker, which is our panel member, Gabrielle Hall, and ask her to share her experiences and case examples.
Thanks so much, Frederick. And again, I'd like to just say a deep thank you to Jess Gallagher for inviting me to participate today. She and Dr. Esposito both know how important this colloquium is to me personally. It was 10 years ago at this very event in person that my whole career kicked off. So thank you for inviting me to participate. I guess building stronger business connections is the bread and butter work of Austrade. So as a lot of you would know, Austrade is the federal government agency responsible for supporting exporters to go global and then attracting foreign direct investment back into Australia. As I like to describe it, the unofficial tagline, I call it International Tinder for Business. So we make introductions and we make matches. And certainly at the moment, my role very much is to attract foreign direct investment into Australia from the Americas. But last year in 2020, I was in Santiago as the Trade Commissioner in the embassy, had 6 weeks on the ground, and then the pandemic happened, and I had to essentially facilitate business transactions and facilitate business connections from my house in the suburbs. And you know, it sort of got me thinking, and the topic of this panel really got me thinking about the cultural implications of that, because one of the things that Austrade does all around the world is we make business connections and support that facilitation, but we also educate our Australian exporters and businesses on the cultural context within which they're working. And Nigel on panel one spoke about this a bit, but it really did get me thinking, how do we in a Western culture, understanding that the way that trust is built in Latin America through personal relationships, shared values, in order to get the deal, how do you do that when the dinner table is removed and it's replaced with the digital environment? And I still don't have the answer for that. So I've been listening very intently with everyone's responses today, and how optimistic everyone is in terms of how we build trust through a screen and not over a glass of Carmenere. I'm looking at you, Ambassador Powell. Yeah, yes. So I think what I have seen, and I appreciate Vu's really sort of optimistic view as well, is the first part is I couldn't have done that job last year if it wasn't for the business networks that exist. So I'm, make a nod to Alabac and AusCham and ANZMEX and all of those pre-existing groups that exist, because getting a warm introduction through a pre-existing organization really helped me to facilitate a lot of other introductions and gave me that credibility to do that. But from what I'm seeing at the moment, I'm working with a lot of big investors in Latin America who are looking at Australia. They're ready to go. They've, the financing is in order. They just really actually need to get boots on the ground and get a site and shake some hands and sign some paperwork to be able to really commit to some of these big scale projects that we're working on. So I think a bit controversially, I hold the line that some of my other colleagues hold, which is yes, there's been a lot of progress and a lot of change, and we've all adapted really well, but nothing can replace the human face-to-face interaction, and that's something that's certainly been a bit of a hold up for some of the bigger deals that I'm working on at the moment. through Austrade. But that's not to say, Frederick, I have up my sleeve a lot of really positive anecdotes and examples of things that I'm seeing happening. So I think I'll leave it there and contribute further in the conversation.
Thanks for sharing. I really love that Tinder comparison. And yeah, I totally agree with you that social networks and the personal relations are so important. And maybe we can explore that a little bit more in the Q&A. But before we jump into the Q&A, I would like to hand over to our final panel member, Christian Campo, and ask him to share his experiences and opinions on building stronger partnerships.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you guys for inviting me. I'm part of the organization of Alive, and we have always been part of this. So we're very glad to continue working here with you guys. So a bit of an introduction, Christian Campo. I'm the president of the Australian Latin American Young Professionals, which is short for Alive. I also work for Australia's biggest telecommunication company, which is Telstra, and I have my own IT development business. So a bit of, Alive, we're a non-for-profit organization where we focus on entrepreneurship, innovation, and something that we like to call us like creating a bridge between South America and Australia. Our focus is to gather the Latin American young professionals here in Australia and get them together with the community and unify them through professional growth, entrepreneurship, or collaboration. And we offer this to networking, workshops, and marketing materials. As this is a community-based organization, during COVID-19, it's kind of put a bit of a block into what we could do and what we can offer to the community. And this is sort of where we have to sit down and rethink how we're going to be able to add value to our community. So there's a couple of things that came through. There's of course there's the webinars. We had an amazing opportunity to do one with the Panama government, and also to the marketing materials where we kind of try to promote the companies and the startups and how they were able to adapt to this situation. And this is where we got a couple of use cases where we learn. We have Martha from Best Buy, Cesar from Besla Foods, especially because during the COVID pandemic, the food industry and the hospitality industry was hit the hardest. And they were able to adapt to this through expanding the business. So they're no longer going to be able to sell the products only on coffee shops. They're now going to be able to expand this through e-commerce. And this helped at a local level expand and create partnerships with food storage companies and distributions among Melbourne and Sydney. And that way they were able to create this type of partnership at a local level. And at a larger scale, with South America, there's a lot of digital transformation going on. And this actually helped me start developing my own company because especially in OHS, in the OHS in mining, there was a lot of talk about, how to reduce the whole contact between each other. And this is where digitization came into place to be able to transform all the paperwork, all the touching to a more digital way. And this is actually how it helped me develop my company. And they were able to now see the value of data, the value of live data, which is now an amazing opportunity for them to analyze, get better results. And analyze risks that are happening. So I think from these stories, I sort of wanted to take away two main things. The first one is this is not going to be the last big event in history. COVID was huge, but it's not going to be the last one. And we need to adapt, and we need to adapt to these changes. And these changes actually bring opportunities. And this is how we are able to maintain relevant in our business and where we're able to move forward and capitalize on it. My other takeaway is when it comes to relationships online, you need to make sure that you assume it's just a normal talk. I know it's a bit awkward on the camera, but you need to make sure that it's just always put the camera on. They need to see a face to it. And then you just talk to it like it's a normal talk. Because in reality, it's just a normal talk. And it's about being able to make it as fluid as possible. And that's how you're able to create that sort of partnership between someone who you never met before. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian, for sharing. Yes, totally agree. It's simply the new normal and we all need to get used to it. And it was really good to hear from you that about the examples of businesses that were resilient and actually managed to make the best out of the pandemic and actually to cope with its impact. I would now like to jump into the Q&A session, and whoever in the audience has a question, please type it into the Q&A chat and we'll try to go through them. And we already have a few questions there. And my apologies directly up front. I blame the influence of my French partner for that, because I probably say the name wrong now. But Philippe Chacon asked or said, Australia is suffering critical skilled worker shortage despite decades of mass immigration. Given the large number of professionals seeking opportunities in Latin America, how could the Australian government and LATAM embassies attract such talent to the country? I guess His Excellency is probably the best suited to answer this question.
Yeah, definitely. There are a variety of ways that we can work together, but the best way would be bilateral agreements or even regional agreements between Latin America and Australia that would necessarily involve the Ministry of Immigration here, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in the case that I talked about in agriculture, it would involve the Minister of Agriculture. These things take time, so Australia can do the specific visas required for each type of work and each type of skilled worker needed. There's a lot of help provided by private companies that go that recruit personnel and they recruit this kind of skilled workers. So it's a job that requires many hands into it, embassies, governments, ministers, and the private sector to be able to work out how to get those workers here.
Thanks. We also have another question which is directed towards Paola. Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested to know some examples of partnerships between Australia and Latin America in terms of transfer of technology knowledge for strengthened sustainability in mining. And the question has been asked by Consuela Isabella Garcia Zavala.
Thank you, Frederick. So one great example is actually the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland. It works very closely together with mining companies operating both in Australia and Latin America. And with that, there is a very open exchange of technology and research that's been going on for ages, and it's been developing very good solutions from a sustainability perspective. Also, the Australian government funds in Australia the CRC consortia, and the CRC consortia is actually supported by mining companies again. As part of CRC, a number of technology is developed both in sustainable mining as well as from an operational excellence perspective, and then goes and is implemented in Latin America and the other way around. And we also need to keep in mind that there are a number of private companies in both Latin America and Australia that are developing specific solutions for the mining industry. And as you will know, Consuelo and the rest of the people attending, ESG is quite an important element of our value proposition as mining companies wherever we operate. And we need to ensure that the communities where we operate welcome our operations and that they are aligned with our values and that we are delivering shared benefits for them as part of the operation. So that means that our solutions come for anything and everything under the sun. So circular economy, use of water reticulation, environmental sort of like elements, emissions targets. There are a lot of things happening in this space and ensuring also that our people operate safely at the mine sites. So that is the element of sustainability to protect our communities, taking into account that the local workforce are the ones operating those areas.
Thanks. Okay, another question from, sorry, I didn't even ask if anyone else wanted to jump in. I just thought because Paola is so much focused, or it seems to be the mining expert and everyone else has expertise in different areas. But if anyone else wants to jump in and add something to the discussion. Otherwise, I move on to the next question. Jonathan Acosta asked, do our Latin American embassies feel they have enough support from their own governments? Austrade does a great job for Aussie companies, but I get a feeling that it's not the case for the counterparts. See Pro Mexico as an example. I think that, yeah, that's for His Excellency, but I guess other ambassadors could jump in too if they want to add something.
I really can't speak more than for my own experience. I can't speak for my colleagues. The Guatemalan government does try to do what we can with the resources that we have. We of course have limited resources, and Australia is quite far away from Guatemala, so it's a difficult situation sometimes. But I do get the support that I need from the government, and I try to retribute with giving all of my energy to be able to work like that. Small embassies require a lot of imagination, a lot of effort. But yeah, I do, to answer the question straightly, I do get a lot of help from my government.
That's good to hear. Does any other ambassador wants to jump in at something, or I hope everyone else gets sufficient support too. Otherwise, then I would like to ask a question. It's often easier to switch to virtual collaborations once you have established face-to-face relationships, and we have heard that it was a recurring theme throughout this entire colloquium. Now, considering that international travel and the development of face-to-face relationships was often not possible during the pandemic, can any of the panelists share their experiences or tips for how they managed to establish meaningful relationships virtually during COVID-19? So not the maintenance of existing ones, but really the establishment of new ones.
Frederick, I'm happy to share. I think Christian touched on it before. We can build human contact even if it's over video. I do believe it. I think, we've built we've built a lot of our company over the course of the last 18 months without physically being in the same room as the people that we deal with. I think it's just making sure that we are as receptive to working digitally or virtually as the person on the other end. I know that kind of is a weird thing to say, but if we're open to going, okay, the person on the other end we're willing to do business with, then if everyone does that, then we'll be fine. I'd point out for Australia, and I think Latin America will be in a similar sort of position. Australians are one of the only people in the world that travel 18 hours to go anywhere, right? So for me, I used to have to go around the world to all of our offices in Singapore and London, then fly via the US, go via Johannesburg and come back home. For us, I don't have to do that travel anymore. And so the flip side of it for me is to really sit there and go, it's not a matter of can we, but like, how do we do that? And a big chunk of that is just going to come down to being open to do deals on our end as well. So by that, I mean, I'm always talking to our team about Go1 being a good customer as well as a good vendor. So if we're open to receiving business from other vendors that are doing it virtually, that are working from overseas, then we should be able to do it as well. So I think it's a two-way street there, Frederick, for us to be able to both be open to trading virtually, and then therefore the other person on the other end should be able to be open to doing that as well.
Thanks for sharing. Anyone else wants to jump in at their thoughts and examples?
Yeah, I might just add another example, just from, obviously we're on that sort of facilitation side, witnessing sort of two parties come together, and often the line that gets spun all the time is the importance of finding the right local partner. Find the right local partner, and I have to say that in this context, I've seen a number of companies, Australians going to Latin America and vice versa, that have launched in a market over the last 18 months because they found the right local partner. They haven't stepped foot in the market, but they now have a presence and are able to start operating, doing some business development, building the brand, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's because there was time and care and consideration taken in terms of finding the right local partner. I think in the past, businesses were just more happy to kind of shoot from the hip a bit in that respect and sort of say, you know, you'll do, let's figure it out. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to come to the market, you know, kind of cut ties and start again. But I think there's certainly been a lot more effort on the front end in terms of building the trust and spending that extra time. And yes, the time difference isn't always the best, is it? Because we all know we're all used to late nights and early mornings. But there's been plenty of really fabulous examples of businesses launching. So for one example is this sort of Chilean American business that has this amazing piece of IP for e-commerce and retail. Obviously, one of the winners of the pandemic in terms of the sector, found this incredible executive in Melbourne, and they've, you know, they're in the market and they're making it work because they're a match made in heaven, and they took the time to find that. So there's certainly really positive examples happening. It's just patience, I think, and different ways of thinking.
Thanks. Any other panel member wants to add to that?
Yeah, I think I touched a little bit on it just before, but where I work is Telstra. Digital relationships has never been like a stranger to us, so we're always being very open to the future ways of working. And because of this, we actually, you know, for example, my boss lives in Tasmania. Most of my teammates are in Melbourne, and some of them are in rural Victoria, some of them in Sydney. So we're all over the place. And it can be a little bit daunting in regards to, you know, how do we create this relationship, just not a professional way, but also, you know, try to create a connection between each other. And then it's also as well about, you know, you need to understand, you know, if this is the only way we can talk to, it's about as well relaxing and not just picking a calendar and agenda and just pay point 1, 2, 3 by, because then it makes the relationship too static, and then it's hard to create that you know, core relationship, especially when you want to make deals or you want to be, you know, have a good relationship with your client. And this is some of the learnings that I took into my business, and I was able to create a really, really good relationship with a couple of partners that I have in South America, in Uruguay, and Argentina. And I never met these people before. We have only met through camera, but it's about, you know, creating that sort of relaxation environment when you're having these conversations. So everyone is a bit more free to be themselves. You know, we don't have that opportunity that you usually have, maybe go for a lunch or a dinner or something. And you need to make what we have at the moment into this, create that environment in there.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with all of you. In my first career before joining academia, and that's already quite a while ago, I was working for international companies, so IBM and Hewlett Packard. And at that point of time, it was already totally normal that you worked with colleagues across the globe and had these collaborations. But I think it's especially for businesses that are not used to working like that, it's a big step forward to suddenly having to build these relationships and start these collaborations virtually. And yeah, but it's great to see that it seems everyone, or more and more people, are getting up to speed and to hear these great examples. So directly jumping into the next question, and you already touched on some examples, but often crises provide opportunities to do things differently. So do you know of any examples where the COVID-19 crisis has triggered the establishment of new business collaborations and partnerships? And if yes, can you explain how and why? I know Gabrielle already touched a little bit on this recruitment of this executive in Melbourne, but I was wondering if anyone else has some examples in this regard. And Christian, of course, also just explained examples of his team.
While people are thinking, I might jump in with another example, Frederick, this time from the government. So one thing in response to Corona that the Australian government has established, and I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, it's called the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. So basically the joining together of Home Affairs, Austrade, and under the guise of trying to attract, you know, marquee investment into Australia, because, you know, I guess guess there's been a bit of an international scramble to try and, attract capital while everyone had sort of bunkered down initially. And this program has been running, I think it's running to the end of this financial year coming, but it's about how do we use, some of the levers. So, there's a thing called the Global Talent Visa, which is essentially a fast track to PR that are, nominated people can apply for, and couple that with sort of really high level engagement with some of our business community globally to have those conversations in terms of what would it take to get you to come to Australia and establish and create jobs and growth and all that good stuff. What sort of regulatory reform could help you to do that? What sort of visas might you need for a technical team? What are the decision makers you need to speak to? And this group that was set up and with the 2 government departments, but then also engages the state governments, the Department of Industry, Department of Ag. Sort of, it's a whole of government approach to aggressively attract investment into the country. And had the pandemic not happened, this innovative new whole of government approach to engaging with the business community globally wouldn't have happened. And it helps. There's a lot of influence that they have some really great levers to pull. But I just wanted to note that from a government perspective, that things have shifted as well. It's not just the business community that's adapted. It's also the government adapting to the business community to and with.
Thanks for sharing. That brings me, I think we have time for one more question. And there was one in the chat from Consuela Isabel Garcia Zavala, which neatly ties into what you just shared, Gabriel, or at least links to it. How challenging have you found to deal with different regulatory frameworks when doing business partnerships with Latin America?
I might jump in there, Frederick, and I think from any company perspective, it's not different to how you expand business into any other region, and it's all about finding the right partner. And that's the reason why Austrade exists. That's the reason why, for instance, the organization that I represent here and I'm the director of the Latin America Business Council actually facilitates those links with the right businesses that can support you to expand your operations in Latin America. Alabac, for instance, has got a very large directory of lawyers, accountants, and every other firm in Latin America that will guide Australian companies in the right directions whenever they want to open up their new opportunities in the region. I think it also comes with the understanding that it takes some time to prepare, and it's like preparing for anything in life. And once you do your pre-work, go and engage with the right people and understand well enough what the risks are, there will be ways to mitigate all of that and still charge on with business, because there is nothing that will stop business more than lack of energy. So if you got that, there is nothing else there to stop you.
Thanks. Totally agree. Anyone wants to add something to that? No? Then
I can touch a little bit on it.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. In Alive, we are an event sort of non-for-profit organization. It was very hard to keep up with a lot of these regulations, especially in Australia. Here we are changing sort of daily. The rules here change in a daily way of what we can do and we cannot do. So it was a bit difficult to try to keep up with it, but we were also trying to be able to adapt in a situation to become hybrid. So in this scenario, when rules change, sometimes you can have an event up to 100 people, but then the next day a case might come up, and then you can now have up to 30 people. So then how we could adapt to this scenario was through utilizing like a bit of a hybrid thinking. We're going to live stream the event, and when we're going to minimize to 20 people, so that way a lot of people could still access and see all the knowledge and everything about the event without being able to fully cancel it or to fully move it away, because it's about adapting. It's about adapting every single day about how the changes of the rules are happening daily.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, it reminds me very much to university teaching. We also have to adapt from one day to another, to one day you're allowed to teach in the classroom, the next day you suddenly have to cater to an online audience. And so yeah, can totally relate to that. A big thank you to all the panel members. We've heard some really interesting cases of new and strengthened collaborations and heard some really interesting perspectives. And I think it's great to see that despite and sometimes even because of the challenging situation, many new collaborations have been formed and existing ones have been strengthened. And I think it also came across throughout the entire colloquium that we have been quite fortunate that we have experienced such tremendous advances in digital technologies in the decades before the pandemic, because that has actually allowed us to collaborate and to establish and maintain partnerships despite the travel restrictions and border closures. Having said that, I would now hand over to Jessica, who will announce the next speaker.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Frederick, and to all the panelists, and for the fantastic questions from the audience. Again, really insightful discussion and lots to consider as we make our way through into whatever the post-COVID pandemic normal looks like. I'd now like to welcome Richard Andrews, who's the chairman of the Australian Latin American Business Council, or ALABAC, to give an update on activities.
Thanks, Jessica. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm speaking from today, the Wajik people of the Perth region. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of this city and of this region. To commence, I'd like to congratulate UQ for putting this together. It's been an exceptionally well-run and informative colloquium so far, and I'd like to express ALABAC's appreciation for the opportunity to continue to work with the University of Queensland. It's been a long and very beneficial association for all of us. As many of you know, ALABAC was established in 1989 and supports the growth of trade, investment, tourism, and students and staff mobility between Australia and Latin America. We engage with all sectors, including education, mining equipment and technology, the met sector, energy, infrastructure, agriculture, professional services and innovation. Our members range from large multinational organisations to SMEs and professional service providers and education institutions. Over the past year, we've held regular meetings with government, Latin American ambassadors and industry leaders. We've continued to provide networking opportunities and introductions for our members to accelerate and consolidate their entry into Australia and Latin American countries. We meet regularly with the private sector to share unique insights on key issues impacting business within the region. We are the leaders in Australia in raising awareness amongst government and industry of the importance of the Latin American region and the need to grow this very important business relationship. We're working closely with federal and state governments and key stakeholders to influence policy and promote, encourage and facilitate commerce, trade and investment links between Australia and the countries of Latin America. We organise regular functions and events to provide our members with access to decision makers who can help them pursue their goals. During the pandemic, we've delivered over 60 webinars and engaged virtually with more than 5,000 contacts across Australia and Latin America. Over the past 2 years, like most of you, we've had to change our approach. Obviously, this has led to many different aspects of how we all do business. But it has also led to more direct engagement with the region. We've established binational business councils with Chile, Peru, Mexico, and Central America. And these strategic alliances represent a unique opportunity for Australian companies to access key players and decision makers in the region. Whilst we do intend to meet face to face in the future, and whenever we can, the global change has given us opportunities we may not have had so quickly as we have had during these times. And we've found that establishing these bilateral business chambers and councils have been very, very warmly welcomed by people in the region, because they can see that the links with Australia are strengthening and that the tyranny of distance is not preventing us from moving forward. With the face-to-face events, as many of you have also said, nothing replaces them. And we recently held our annual dinner in Perth. And for the first time ever, we live streamed it, which is what I believe we're doing today. And that was, again, well received. And it gave us the opportunity to share what we do with many more people. And that has been wonderful. Our newsletter goes out to over 5,000 people. And we're continuing to expand the knowledge and the opportunities for business networking with Latin America. On the 27th of October, we celebrate our annual networking day, which is normally held at Parliament House in Canberra. And like last year, we'll be holding it virtually again this year. And when we do return to face-to-face events and have an more open travel opportunity between Australia, within Australia, we will continue to have a virtual element as part of our networking day. We host Business Excellence Award dinners and many other networking events through the year. We've revamped the Alabac website and social media channels, providing access to up-to-date information and resources, as well as digital tools to directly interact with our members and participate in business communities. Our members are given visibility with regular updates of their activities in Australia and the region. Some other initiatives that we've had in conjunction with Koala, we've launched the first ever soft landing platform, which is designed to provide an easy transition for companies wanting to enter the Australian market. Through this platform, Alabac offers access to our local business ecosystem, providing access to on-the-ground technical support, recommendations and services to accelerate entry into the Australian market. Our members app gives our members opportunity to interact directly by phone, email or text. And the matchmaking platform, which is under development, is a digital tool that facilitates the introduction, planning and organisation of one-to-one or one-on-one meetings between business contacts that are in different time zones. Alabac has partnered with Global Victoria to support internationalisation of Victorian nets exporters, as well as developing opportunities in fintech and in green hydrogen in Latin America. So as an association, we've been around for a long time. We've seen many changes, and we're pleased to say that we've been able to adapt to the changes of recent times. We'll continue to provide support to our members and drive engagement with the Latin American region. And I'd just like to congratulate everyone who's participated today, because I found it to be very beneficial and a very common thread that has emerged, which is the distance is getting less and less, and we are engaging more and more. And COVID-19 has had many, many negative effects, but it's had some positive effects. And it's given us the opportunity to engage like this on a more regular basis without the stigma of not meeting face-to-face. So congratulations and thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Richard. Really appreciate, and on behalf of my colleagues at the University of Queensland, I really want to thank you and the Alabac team for this strong partnership over many, many years in really raising visibility of opportunities to expand partnerships and collaboration in Latin America. It's now my honour to invite His Excellency, Mr. Patricio Powell, Ambassador of Chile, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Hello to everyone. It's have been given the honor of giving a few closing remarks to this fantastic colloquium. And I would like to begin by expressing, if I may, on behalf of my colleagues in the diplomatic corps, what a pleasure it was to be part of this activity, that it's, again, being done under challenging circumstances, yet is happening, and which is what we value the most. And now that I said that, I'd like to refer to this long-standing and the commitment of the University of Queensland with Latin America and the Caribbean. It has a proven commitment. It has shown agility and also a capacity to look into the future to overcome whatever challenges may be placed in front of us. I would like to also refer to how much we appreciate the role that ALAVAC has as part of this initiative, and also obviously to recognize the role that the Australian government and the state governments have in promoting this connection between Latin America and Australia. And when I mentioned the university, obviously, I think it is important to see that this commitment is expressed at the leadership level, at the academic level, and very, very important at the student level. If I may very, very briefly, I'm not aiming to find the opportunity to do a summary. I hope this will not take more than 2 or 3 minutes, but I would like to begin by remembering an element that Vice Chancellor Professor Terry mentioned in her opening words. She said, reliance and innovation has resulted in new opportunities in this very challenging COVID and post-COVID environment. That expression, I think, in a way was reflected also in the words of Ambassador Miguel Palomino de la Gala, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, who referred to a topic that has been present across most of the interventions today, which is the impact of accelerated change and the way this has been faced, sometimes successfully, sometimes with more difficulty, and how, as a result of COVID-19, the digital economy has become more and more significant. I would also like to remember that Ambassador Palomino proposed the idea of a virtual Colombo plan for Latin America, and maybe the possibility that this could be led by the University of Queensland. In the first section of this colloquium, we addressed reshaping the way in which we work and learn in this pandemic and post-pandemic times. And Dr. Esposto, the host of this part of the colloquium, focused a comment on the effects of an increased digital divide and how this affects us. And in a way, this was also retaken by Nigel Warren when he said at the end, actually, of his intervention that he hoped that by 2022, he's hoping for a renewed face-to-face collaboration, that in spite of all that we've learned and all that the adaptations that have been able to maintain work and interaction in these COVID times, face-to-face interaction becomes, in the end, pretty irreplaceable. This connects, in a way, also with what Associate Professor Ayoko mentioned when she was addressing the physical environment of work and the way this links to the confinement of the pandemic. She referred to the concept of an agile office and also underlined the fact that there could be important opportunities for collaboration and research regarding the way in which this new physicality, in a way, affects the way in which we interact and collaborate. And she emphasized that collaboration, in the end, ultimately, is intentional. It needs to be pushed in this technological environment in which we've been moving recently. Then Marta Jimenez, she gave us her experience as a graduate student at the University of Queensland and how she was able to adapt to these new circumstances, overcome some difficulties. And She also emphasized the need for maybe a new educational model, underscoring the issue of access to technology, again, the digital divide that had been mentioned before. Steve Baraclough, again, he mentioned 3 ways in which change has accelerated in the links between Latin America and Australia. One is that Australian companies have increased their interest in Latin America, particularly in the area of renewables, including hydrogen, clean hydrogen. The second area is in critical minerals and lithium. And thirdly, in education, of course, the search for diversified markets for educational services. Then moving to the keynote speaker, Erin Watson-Lynn. She gave us some words on her experience creating the Australia-Latin American Emerging Leaders Dialogue, and she emphasized the need that she saw at some point for creating that dialogue, that opportunity, and the difficulties associated with it, but also the energy and that she was able to find in, for instance, collaborators who have been doing this for free because of some challenges regarding securing financing, but showing that in the end there is this willingness to make this idea of the sustained dialogue work. The second part of this colloquium was referring to building strong business connections and partnerships in this COVID and post-COVID times. Ambassador Ronald Resinos from Guatemala addressed in a very focused manner to new directions in which we could look at the relationship between Latin America and Australia. One, the advantages of Latin America for nearshoring as a tool, and also on the issue, the possibilities that were offered by labor, by human capital, and that also the experience that some countries in Latin America have regarding that issue. And basically, he said, we need to think outside of the box, rethink certain aspects of the Latin America-Australia partnership, and which would be beneficial, looking beyond, for instance, natural resources. Then Paula Lasso, recognizing that COVID has been an extremely hard reality for everybody. She mentioned that in a way, COVID has been also a very direct CEO in terms of forcing or maybe accelerating some decisions, for instance, in the area of digital solutions. And she also referred to the way in which the mining industry particularly has responded, particularly in certain issues in this time of pandemic. Vu Tran made a point on remarking that talent is probably the key driver for growth, and that again, COVID has accelerated, has been a catalyzer for looking at sources of talent beyond what we were used to, and that in a way, these digital solutions, technological solutions, have had an important impact on looking at better sourcing talent. Gabrielle Hall, she pointed the importance of looking at the cultural context, and when it comes to business facilitation, and her experience, for instance, in Chile during the pandemic, and that how, for instance, the notion of finding the right local partner has been challenged during these new conditions. And finally, because in honor of time, Cristian Campo, among many things, he said, COVID is hard, COVID is tough, but it will pass, and we will all learning from this experience. That has been a very quick, somewhat summary of what we've learned, what we've discussed today. I want to close again recognizing the relevance of having had this colloquium in these new circumstances has been, for me, again, a fantastic opportunity, a great avenue for rethinking, re-examining what Australia and Latin America are doing together and what they can be doing, can continue doing together. Thanks again to the organizers for this fantastic opportunity. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. We really appreciate those closing remarks. You've summed up today's webinar so successfully, so succinctly, which I know was probably a really big challenge because there was some really meaty conversations today. So I would just like to say a big thank you to all of the speakers that participated in today's webinar. It's been topical and engaging. My sincere thanks to all of the ambassadors and charge d'affaires. We really appreciate your ongoing support in making this event happen each year, and very much hope that 2022 will allow the university to host the colloquium back in Brisbane. The team has certainly missed welcoming you all to our campuses, and very much hope that there'll be an in-person event again next year. Unfortunately, after participating and watching this event evolve over many years, I will not be here with you next year, as my time with UQ is coming to an end in just a few weeks. After 15 years with the University of Queensland, I'll be starting a new adventure as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor External Engagement at the University of Adelaide. So I won't say goodbye to you because I know that it will take many hands and the full ecosystem to continue to build the strong Australia-Latin American relations. And I very much hope to have an opportunity to work with you again, albeit in a different capacity. But in the interim, I will continue, no matter where I am, to cheer on the UQ Latin American Colloquium, because I honestly believe that it is such an important event in sharing ideas about how we strengthen the links between our two regions, and a really important initiative in building those partnerships. So thank you all so much for the support that you've provided for this year's event, for the support that you've provided me personally, and really looking forward to hearing what the plans are for next year. That brings us to the end of today's program. A reminder that the recording of today's event will be made available in coming days to all registered attendees. And so we'll make sure that we send you a link once that's ready. Thank you again to everyone who's participated, particularly the ambassadors, charge d'affaires, members of the diplomatic corps, to our MCs and to our keynote speakers and panelists. Thank you so very much, and wish you all the very best for the rest of this very crazy year. Thank you so much, everybody.